Welcome to the channel as we start another story from the Creepy Tales playlist. In the darkness, stories take shape. Some are whispered from the shadows. Others echo from places you should never go. These are the echoes of the unknown. Tales of horror, suspense, and fear that lingers. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones you can't explain. The ones you don't want to know exist. Let's begin. The rain drizzled over the ancient village, mist swirling through the narrow cobblestone streets. Olivia pulled her hood tighter, her voice a faint, nervous laugh. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Mark grinned, his phone held up, a crude map glowing on the screen. "It's here. Locals just don't want tourists getting in." The group of five, Olivia, Mark, Sarah, Liam, and Rachel, pushed through the twisting alleys, their boots splashing against the wet stone. A weathered archway loomed ahead, cracked and covered in moss, an ancient iron gate chained shut. "See? Forbidden, creepy, and perfect for exploring," Liam joked, snapping a photo. Mark pulled a small lockpick from his pocket, his fingers working against the rusted chain. The lock clicked, the chain slumping to the ground with a faint clatter. They stepped inside, flashlights cutting pale beams through the thick, stale air. The stone walls were damp, lined with faded, ancient murals, twisted, ghostly figures painted in dark, shadowy colors. "Creepy," Rachel whispered, her voice thin. "But this is amazing." But Olivia paused, her flashlight beam catching one of the murals. The figures seemed to twist, their pale, empty eyes following her. A faint chill crawled up her spine. The tunnel stretched on, damp and dark, the air thick and cold. Their flashlights carved weak, pale beams against the ancient stone, the soft echo of their footsteps pressing against their ears. Mark led the way, his phone's map flickering. "This is supposed to be the main path, but the signal's awful." He tapped the screen, but it froze, the map glitching. "Stupid thing. Just follow the walls. We won't get lost." Liam grinned, flashing his light across the twisting murals. But his smile faded. The painted figures, ghostly shapes twisting along the walls, seemed to shift. Their pale eyes seemed clearer now, their faces slightly twisted, distorted. "Did they change?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Just your imagination," Mark muttered, pushing forward. But Olivia hesitated, her flashlight catching another twisted figure, its eyes wide, staring directly at her. A faint, rhythmic whisper echoed through the tunnel, a distant, low hum, barely audible. But then she turned, and the entrance was gone. Just a solid, damp wall. Liam, eager for adventure, rushed ahead, his flashlight beam bouncing against the twisting walls. "Hey! Check this out!" His voice echoed, faint and distant. "Liam! Stay with us!" Mark shouted, his voice sharp, but Liam's laughter was already fading, swallowed by the thick darkness. They hurried after him, their footsteps quick, echoing. But the tunnel seemed to stretch, twisting, the air colder, sharp. "Liam!" Olivia's voice cracked, but there was only silence. The flashlight beams danced against the cold stone, but then they stopped, an empty, damp wall. Liam was gone. His flashlight lay against the floor, its pale, flickering beams slicing through the mist. "Liam?" Sarah whispered, her fingers clawing at Mark's sleeve. But the darkness was thick, pressing. He has to be here. He was just ahead of us." Rachel's voice was a faint, desperate gasp. But there was nothing, just the thick, cold air pressing against them. And the faint, rhythmic whisper seemed closer. Panic clawed at them. Sarah's voice cracked, her fingers digging into Mark's arm. "Liam! This isn't funny!" But the silence was thick, pressing, the cold air sharp against their faces. Mark's voice was a desperate rasp. We must have missed him. We'll turn back." But as they turned, the tunnel seemed different, twisting, narrower, the damp stone pressing closer. The air was sharp, the darkness thick. Olivia's flashlight beam trembled, her breath a faint, rapid gasp. I can't see anything," Rachel whimpered, her own light flickering. They pushed forward, but the murals seemed different, the pale, twisted figures clearer, their wide eyes staring, their faces twisted in horror. Olivia's light caught a figure, a woman, her hands pressed against the wall, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. That looks like... Sarah's voice was a thin, desperate whisper. It's just paint! Mark shouted, but his voice shook. We need to keep moving! But the whisper seemed louder now, faint, rhythmic, pressing against their ears. The walls pressed closer, the darkness thickening. Their flashlights were pale, flickering beams, trembling against the damp stone. Olivia's breath came in sharp, desperate gasps. Mark, please, this isn't right. We should have seen the entrance by now. Rachel's voice was a faint, choked whisper. But the tunnel twisted endlessly, the darkness pressing against their faces. The murals stretched along the walls, figures twisting, clawing, their pale, wide eyes staring, their faces twisted in terror. Olivia's light caught another figure, a woman, her face pale, her mouth frozen in a scream. Her fingers clawed against the cold stone. It's Rachel, Sarah whispered, stumbling back, her breath a thin, desperate gasp. Stop! Stop looking at them! Mark shouted, his voice cracking. But the murals seemed closer, the figures stretching, their pale eyes following. And then Rachel screamed, a thin, desperate cry. Her flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering. Then darkness. Rachel! Olivia screamed. But Rachel was gone. Rachel! Olivia's voice cracked, her flashlight beams slicing through the thick darkness. But the tunnel was empty, just damp, twisting stone pressing against them. Mark's breathing was rapid, sharp, his fingers clawing at his hair. No, this isn't, she was right here. Sarah's voice trembled, her flashlight beam weak, trembling. She was just beside me. She can't just be gone. But the darkness pressed closer, the air sharp and cold. Olivia's gaze swept across the twisting murals, her pulse racing. The pale, twisted figures stretched along the walls, their faces clear now, twisted in horror, their wide, empty eyes staring. And there, pressed against the cold stone, one figure seemed too clear. A woman, her mouth open in a silent scream, her fingers clawing at the wall. It's Rachel! Olivia whispered, her breath a faint mist. Sarah stumbled back, her voice a desperate rasp. No, this is wrong! But the whisper was louder now, a faint, rhythmic hum pressing against their ears. Mark pulled Olivia and Sarah forward, his flashlight beam weak, trembling. The tunnel twisted, the cold, damp air pressing against their faces. We have to keep moving. We'll find the entrance. We just have to keep walking. But each turn seemed the same, dark, twisting stone, the murals pressing closer. The pale, ghostly figures seemed to stretch, leaning forward, their wide, staring eyes following. I don't understand. We came this way. Sarah's voice was a thin, desperate whimper. But the air grew colder, sharp, a faint, sour scent twisting through. Olivia's flashlight caught another mural, another figure, its pale face twisted in horror, its fingers clawing at the wall. Sarah, don't look at them. Just keep walking, Mark whispered, but his voice was shaking. But then the whisper rose, thick, rhythmic, pressing against their ears. Sarah's flashlight flickered, then went dark. Her voice was a thin, desperate gasp. And then she was gone. Sarah! Mark's voice was a frantic, desperate roar, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness. But there was nothing, just the cold, damp stone, the thick, suffocating air. She was just here! Olivia's voice cracked, her fingers digging into Mark's arm. But the darkness seemed thicker now, pressing closer, the pale, twisted murals clearer, figures clawing at the walls, their wide eyes frozen in terror. But then Olivia's beam caught something, another figure. Twisted, pale, clawing at the wall, its mouth frozen in a silent scream. It's Sarah! Olivia's breath was a faint, desperate gasp. Mark stumbled back, his hand gripping the wall. No, this is some trick! Some sick joke. But the whisper was a thick, rhythmic hum now, pressing against their ears. A faint, cold wind stirred, sharp and sour, twisting through the tunnel. We have to keep moving, Mark whispered, his voice cracking. Just keep walking. Don't look back. They ran, Mark pulling Olivia, their flashlight beams weak, trembling. The tunnel seemed narrower, the walls pressing closer, the air sharp and cold. Olivia's breath came in frantic, rapid gasps. Mark, it's closing in, it's getting smaller, she whispered, her voice cracking. The murals twisted, the pale, ghostly figures seemed to lean forward, hands clawing at the stone, their faces twisted in horror. One figure's eyes seemed to follow them, wide, empty. Mark's light flickered, the beam sputtering. Don't look at them. Just keep going. But then he stopped, his breath a faint, desperate rasp. Wait, no. His flashlight caught another figure, pale, wide-eyed, clawing at the wall. A man, his mouth open in a silent scream. It was Mark. No, this isn't real. It's not. But his voice was swallowed by the thick, pressing darkness. His light went out. And then so did he. Olivia was alone. Her flashlight beam was pale, weak, a thin, trembling glow cutting through the suffocating darkness. The walls seemed to press closer, the pale, twisted murals stretching, figures clawing, their faces wide, twisted in terror. Her pulse hammered, her breath a faint, desperate mist. Please, she whispered. But the whisper was thick, rhythmic, pressing against her ears. Mark was gone. Sarah was gone. Rachel. Liam, all gone. And she was alone. Her flashlight beams swept across the cold stone, the murals seemed to shift, new figures, clearer, pressing against the walls. And she saw them, Liam, Rachel, Sarah, Mark, their pale faces frozen in terror, their fingers clawing at the wall. No, please! Her voice was a faint, desperate gasp. The whisper seemed louder, a thick, distorted hum that seemed to thrum against her bones. Olivia's legs trembled, her breath a faint, frantic gasp. The whisper was a thick, rhythmic hum now, louder, pressing against her ears, clawing at her mind. But just ahead, a pale, ghostly light. Please, she whispered, stumbling forward, her flashlight beam weak, flickering. The tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber. At the center, a stone pedestal stood, and atop it, an ancient, cracked lantern burned with a pale, ghostly flame, cold, blue, twisting like a ghostly ribbon. The whisper seemed to rise, a slow, distorted chant, pressing against the thick air. Her gaze swept across the walls, murals clear and vivid, the twisted figures clawing, their faces frozen in silent screams. But they were different now. The figures were clearer, Liam, Rachel, Sarah, Mark, their pale, horrified faces pressed against the cold stone. Their wide eyes stared directly at her. No! Olivia's voice was a thin, desperate whisper. But then she saw something else, twisting shadows, coiling behind the murals, pale, dark shapes slithering like ghostly tendrils. They seemed to pulse, pressing against the cold, cracked stone. The whisper was a thick, rhythmic hum now, a slow, distorted chant that seemed to claw at Olivia's mind. The lantern's pale, ghostly flame twisted, coiling like a thin, cold ribbon. Her flashlight beam trembled, slicing across the cold, damp walls. But the murals seemed to shift, figures moving, their faces twisting, clawing at the stone. And then she saw herself, pale, wide-eyed, clawing at the wall, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. No, this isn't real! She screamed, stumbling back. But her voice was swallowed by the thick, pressing darkness. The whisper was louder, a thick, distorted chorus that seemed to pulse beneath her skin. The lantern's flame flickered, twisted, and then surged, pale, ghostly tendrils stretching from it, curling through the air. Olivia's breath came in rapid, desperate gasps. The shadows coiled, twisting, pale and thin, pressing against the cold stone walls. And behind them, within the twisted darkness, she saw it. A shape. Vast. Shifting. Pale, empty eyes watching her. Terror clawed at her. Olivia bolted from the chamber, her flashlight beam shaking, her breath a frantic, desperate rasp. The tunnel seemed narrower, the air thick and cold. The whisper was a thick, rhythmic drone, pressing against her mind. But then, just ahead, a thin beam of pale light. Daylight. Weak gray, but there. Hope clawed at her chest. Please, please! Her hands slammed against the damp, cold door. Her fingers clawed at the ancient, rusted handle. She shoved, her shoulder slamming against it. The door groaned, then burst open. Pale light spilled through, and she stumbled out. Cold air bit against her face. Her legs wobbled, her pulse a frantic hammer. She was outside. She was free. But something was wrong. The pale light washed over gray, ancient stones. No village. No streets. Just a vast, empty clearing filled with mist, twisted stone pillars rising like ancient, broken teeth. The mist twisted, curling around her legs, cold and sharp. Olivia staggered forward, her breath a faint mist against the cold air. No, no, this was the village, it was here. Her voice was a thin, desperate cry, swallowed by the thick, swirling mist. But the village was gone. No cobblestone streets. No crumbling houses. Only the twisted, mist-shrouded stones, cold, ancient, rising like broken fangs against the pale, gray sky. She turned, her pulse racing, and stared at the catacomb entrance, no longer a cracked, moss-covered archway, but a towering, pristine doorway of smooth, pale stone. Ancient symbols twisted along the edges, spiraling upward, pulsing faintly with pale, ghostly light. Her fingers clawed at the door, but it didn't move. Her flashlight beam caught the symbols, twisting, spiraling, faintly glowing. And then she saw it, etched into the smooth stone, her own face. Pale, wide-eyed, twisted in horror. Her fingers pressed against the stone, frozen in a silent scream. Her pulse hammered. The whisper was everywhere now, thick, rhythmic, pressing against her ears. The whisper was a thick, distorted chorus now, faint, rhythmic, clawing at Olivia's mind. Her gaze swept across the ancient stones, and she saw them, the murals, clear and vivid. Liam. Rachel. Sarah. Mark. Their pale, horrified faces stared back at her, their fingers clawing at the cold stone. Their wide, empty eyes were filled with terror, frozen in silent screams. Her breath was a faint, desperate gasp. Please, someone help me! But the mist thickened, twisting around her legs, cold and sharp. The air was freezing, her pulse a faint, frantic beat. And then she saw herself, her own face etched into the wall, her mouth open, her fingers clawing at the stone. The whisper grew louder, a thick, rhythmic hum. The mist curled, twisting around her arms, her chest. Cold, ghostly tendrils pressing against her skin. The doorway loomed above her, the pale symbols glowing, twisting, pulsing. And then the mist pressed closer, thick, suffocating. Her flashlight flickered, then died. Her scream was a faint, muffled gasp, swallowed by the thick, twisting mist. When the mist cleared, the stone wall was smooth, cold. Another figure now stood among the others, pale, wide-eyed, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. The catacomb entrance loomed, pristine, untouched, its smooth, pale stones glowing faintly. The twisted, ancient murals stared out, pale, horrified faces frozen in terror. And somewhere beyond the mist, the faint, rhythmic whisper continued, eternal, hungry. Next time you're home all alone, and you hear those things that go bump in the night, sometimes they are best left alone.